Hey, it's Justin Harvey. Thanks for tuning into the Anesthesia and Pain Management Success podcast. With APM Success, we take a close look at important topics pertaining to business, practice management, personal finance, and careers for anesthesiologists and pain management physicians. We work hard to take your critical questions straight to the experts. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to APM Success, episode 250. Quarter of the way to the millennium mark. Hard to believe that I have spent that many cumulative hours yakking into a microphone. Today I want to cover a topic that we most recently addressed back in episode 144, which is the idea of how to protect yourself from financial fraud. This is something that as technology improves, as more and more personal information becomes publicly available, fraud has been getting more sophisticated, and efforts to separate honest, tax-paying people from their hard-earned dollars are getting more complex and difficult to inoculate yourselves from. But knowledge is power, as they say. And this has particularly come on my radar because of a conversation I had, or an email exchange I had recently with a podcast listener who was sharing a story about them personally, where this physician's parents had millions of dollars saved in retirement accounts. This was a blue-collar family, diligently saving for decades, stashing away money for their retirement and also to leave a parting gift to their children at their passing. And tragically, this older couple, not super old, but probably in their late 60s, they fell victim to some of these scammers, which resulted in the loss of over $2 million of assets that were specifically in Roth IRAs, which, as I was reading this account, it kind of made me want to throw up. Thinking about the effort that this family had put in to save and the way that very quickly their life's work, financially speaking, had been obliterated. So I want to share today's story and some resources, yes, for the listeners of this podcast, but also really for the parents of the listeners of this podcast, because research has shown as folks age, they become less skeptical, more trusting, more vulnerable, financially speaking, and more likely to not only make a poor financial decision, but to trust someone that they shouldn't. So if you're listening to this, this is going to be helpful for you in your life to be skeptical of and to be aware of some of the methods of fraud that perpetrators out there are currently using, but also prepare your parents, help them understand what's going on, help them to, spot vulnerabilities. If they're not working with a professional currently, that's something that you may want to consider, because working with an advisor does create an extra layer of protection from these types of activities. In every case that I've heard of where significant financial fraud was perpetrated, it was in somebody who had access to self-direct third-party wire transfers, meaning I'm moving money from my account into another account that's not titled in my name, and that transfer is irrevocable and immediate. That is often the mechanism whereby people's retirement accounts are pillaged. There was recently an article in the New York Times, which I will link to in the show notes as well. So if you go to apmsuccess.com/250, you'll see that resource there. And it unpacks more of these stories, including an older attorney who had fallen victim to a well-orchestrated scam where he believed, and this is a common refrain, he believed he was assisting federal investigators to protect his funds from thieves. And there were people posing as IRS agents, people as posing as agents with the Department of the Treasury, very official sounding. Folks that, they sound like professionals on the phone. And then there's additional validation from emails and text messages. So there's like a multi-channel communication happening. And this is, at first glance, it can definitely seem legitimate to people who aren't super skeptical. And you should know that I've never heard of a case where the IRS is going to, request a massive wire transfer in order to have you collaborate to help catch thieves or fraudsters or people who are laundering money or things like that. That's how this was often positioned with these scam conversations. And in this account with this attorney, there was $740,000 from his retirement accounts that was moved through a series of Bitcoin and wire transfers, all under false pretenses. And ultimately, that was money that he lost. That story was just one of many. And the reality is that particularly Americans over the age of 60 are increasingly targeted. And scammers know that this cohort in this country, in this age bracket, they hold the largest amount of savings and therefore are the most targeted and cognitively the most vulnerable. According to the FBI, cybercrime losses exceeded $12.5 billion in 2023 alone, with over $3.4 billion of that lost by people over 60. So understanding who the potential victims are is a first step to be able to protect yourself and protect your family. And as I was thinking about the case of the physician who reached out to me, it was tragic on a number of levels. A, so much effort invested by this family to save that is basically gone for nothing. B, the financial hardship that this family is going to experience in their latter years when they are retired and they can't just go make more money. And then C, and the physician was very, I think, charitable and generous and wasn't self-motivated, but I was thinking as the financial advisor, this is a couple $1,000,000 that this guy was going to inherit. He was going to inherit it tax-free. And it's his family's multi-generational wealth that's being pilfered by opportunistic cyber criminals. So you, dear listener of this podcast, have all kinds of incentive to help your family be protected from these types of things. One other critical point that it is helpful to understand is these transfers are not covered under any type of insurance policy or any reversal of a transaction. It's not like you're doing something and you can just undo it. Whenever you send money to a third-party account, in these cases where cyber criminals are the operating that third-party account, they immediately bounce the money through to somewhere else. So a transaction reversal by the time that fraud is perceived is impossible because there's no way to recoup those losses. So this type of transaction in particular, unbeknownst to the folks who are sending their hard-earned dollars, they don't understand that this is money that can never be returned. And often it is promised by the people talking to them on the phone, help us do this, send us $250,000, we'll send it right back to you. That type of thing, it doesn't work that way. One final point is a common thread in these conversations between the fraudsters and their victims is trying to create a veil of secrecy. You can't tell anyone about this. This is a covert operation. The Department of the Treasury is cracking down on these cyber criminals, and any communication outside of these secure channels is prohibited. And there's this sense of isolation that they try to create. And really what they're doing is just making sure the victim doesn't talk to anybody who may be more skeptical. And so, again, this is another place where having your family involved or having a financial advisor or other professionals involved can be an important check. But you should know that, your mom and dad, they may be talking to somebody who's telling them to not talk to you because of some legal requirement. And so proactively communicating about these schemes can be a really helpful, important practice. So in summary, a couple things to consider as you want to help your family be protected or yourself be protected from these schemes. First is be skeptical. If something feels off, if something's not sitting right, trust that instinct. No legitimate government agency is going to ask you to move money to a quote unquote safe account in an unsolicited call or email. And there's always, whenever you have something from the IRS or whatever, they're going to communicate with you a bunch of times by multiple channels if it's a legitimate request. And you can always talk to a professional if there's any doubt to ensure the veracity of these requests. You want to be sure that you're educated and aware of the methods by which these bad actors have enacted these scams, and helping your family understand, the text message thing, we're going to text you an email and we're going to text you and ask you for your email, and then we're going to send you an email address from a different domain, and then we're going to follow up with a phone call. These scammers are sophisticated enough to have these sort of multifactorial communication methods. And as a result, it does give it seeming legitimacy for folks who are less skeptical. So being aware that it's not just a random cold call from somebody with a heavy accent. It's So it's a much more legitimate presentation, and being prepared for that is really important. And then finally, reporting this is super helpful. So talking to your financial advisor or other law enforcement, if you are, especially if, I hope that no one's in the middle of, beginning. And I mentioned earlier, we have friends who have fallen prey to these schemes. And it wouldn't surprise me with the many, many thousands of downloads of this podcast that somebody's listening to this who has, gone to the store and gotten the gift cards and sent the gift cards to somebody who said, you need to pay this fine and we only accept whatever, a cash Visa card at this point. Things like that. If you're in the midst of that, definitely report this to law enforcement. So this is a little bit of a heavier topic today. Hopefully someone out there will be protected who wasn't before, and will be informed and armed and newly skeptical of any communication relating to significant dollar transfers. Just don't do it. So thanks for tuning in this week. Next week, we're doing a fun episode with answering a few listener questions. I'll talk to you then. Cheers. If you liked what you heard this week, head on over to apmsuccess.com, where you can find more content and free resources to help you build a successful career in anesthesia and pain management. If you wanted to leave a review in iTunes, I'd also really appreciate it. Thanks for using some of your valuable time to join me today on APM Success.